I've come to think of humanity as at the mouth of a very long, very dark tunnel, and right at the end is a little star shining, and that's hope.
Jane, it's always wonderful to see you. Thank you for coming and visiting. You just came from Carmel, so you had a very special birthday celebration there. Can you tell me a little bit about it?
90 dogs for my 90th birthday. It was just magic. All these dogs, I would say more than half off-leash, running in the sea, greeting them all, and no, it was magical.
So you've been obviously working in the field for quite a number of years. What would you say is kind of the biggest change in the conservation sector since you got started?
There's two big changes. One is there's more people aware. There's more little NGOs sprung up to tackle different problems. But the other change is in, the harm that we've done to the natural world, the forests that are disappearing, the loss of biodiversity. So it's kind of, yes, people are more aware, and the big problem is that when people read too much of the doom and gloom, which we need to know about, which is real, but if they read too much about it, they kind of give up, like, what's the point? It's no good. So to give people hope is a very important message. How do I keep hopeful? Because as I'm traveling 300 days a year around the world, which of course is not environmentally good because of all the emissions from planes, etc. But as nobody's given me a magic carpet, and as I think I need to be there to actually talk to people, as I go around the world, I'm meeting incredible people doing amazing things. I'm seeing forests protected, I'm seeing forests and woodlands restored. I'm meeting people who tackle what seems impossible and won't give up.
Part of overcoming sort of anxiety, I think, is feeling like you have agency to make a difference in the world. What is something that sort of like the normal person can do in their everyday life to have a positive impact?
Well, I think if people begin to realize that every day they live, they make some kind of impact, and they begin to think about their own environmental footprint, and they begin to ask questions about what they buy. Was it, when it was made, was it harmful to the environment? Was it cruel to animals like the factory farms? Is it cheap because of unfair wages or slave labor? And then don't buy it. It might cost you a little bit more to buy something that's ethically produced. But if it costs a little bit more, you will value it more and you will waste less. And as you know only too well, human waste is a huge, huge problem. So basically the message is, just remember, everybody, every day you live, you make an impact. Choose wisely.
And sometimes we need to sort of move people who are sort of higher up the food chain, so political leaders and business leaders. So how would the average person in their daily life sort of get their message to those kind of people?
People have, different ways of operating. There are campaigns, petitions, things that one can sign. I always hope that our youth program, many of the young people's parents are in decision-making positions, and I know that youth can influence older people. It's happened again and again.
And you're about to embark on a new campaign looking at how people can exercise their vote in terms of influencing things. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I gather that there are 50 countries around the world that are having elections. Not all presidential, but elections. And, I know for a fact that a lot of particularly young people don't want to vote because they don't particularly care about anybody who's out there. They don't feel that there's any use voting for anybody. So I think the main message is, your vote matters. Please go and vote and just pick the candidate who cares about the future. That's the key message. But your vote matters. Please, please vote.
That's an important message, especially here in the United States, where we're having a big election this year. If you could establish a new global tradition or annual event where everyone in the world would participate to foster deeper connection to nature and wildlife, like what would you envision that being?
Well, I think people will never really rally around to protect nature unless they understand it, unless they experience it. And that's why getting children involved as early as you possibly can. And I've seen the result, you know, and there are so many stories of young people who, they've been maybe in the inner city, they haven't had a chance to get their hands in the earth, they haven't had a chance to see what's in a river or a stream. And so if you can manage to find a way for them to experience nature firsthand. In Canada and Japan, and maybe other countries, but those two I know, doctors can prescribe time in nature. And so when you think about that, that's kind of fascinating. And it just shows that this era now with social media and our children are getting more and more like, you see them going through a beautiful place and they're just looking fixated on their, you know, social media or whatever it is. And that's shocking.
Yeah, I mean, it's really a different world. I mean, the reason I started Mongabay was really because I had those experiences out in nature, and it's certainly harder these days. To what do you credit people's interest in you and your work?
Well, to start with, it was a young girl going out into the forest when no other young girls did and studying chimpanzees. It was kind of like, you know, the Geographic, etc. made it Beauty and the Beast, you know, black creatures in the jungle and the young girl, fair-haired and everything. And that just captured people's attention. That was a good start for me. And then there's two Janes, Rhett. This one talking to you now, just me, you know? But then there's an icon that's built up by Geographic and Discovery and media and blah, 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 whatever. And this Jane has the job keeping up with the icon. And it's because, you know, I can't get through an airport now. So you ask me, what is it? I'm honestly not sure. Maybe you can tell me, can you?
I mean, I think it's your origin story, but then the fact that you moved from being a researcher to being an advocate for wildlife and animals, and especially conveying the idea that animals are a lot like us. They have emotions, they have feelings, which, you know, wasn't, I mean, as you know, was not a mainstream idea when you started promoting it, and people, you know, maybe ridiculed you or criticized you for it, but now the world's kind of caught up to your thinking. So I think people recognize that and appreciate it, and the fact that you're out there every day meeting with people and giving them hope about what could easily be seen as a doom and gloom sort of space. So I mean, that would be my take on it, I think. What would you say you most want to be remembered for?
Two things. One, starting roots and shoots and giving people hope, especially young people, and getting young people involved in the natural world. Secondly, when Louis Leakey, my mentor, told me I had to get a degree, he said, Jane, I picked you, and this was back in 1957, I picked you to study chimps because you hadn't been to university and your mind had not been contaminated by the very reductionist opinion of science back then towards animals. But now I want scientists to take you seriously, so you have to get a PhD. And we don't have time for an undergraduate degree. I've got your place in Cambridge University to study ethology. Well, I didn't know what ethology was, study of behavior, but I hadn't been to college. So I was nervous, and imagine how I felt when all these erudite professors told me I'd done everything wrong. Chimpanzees, you shouldn't name them, you should give them numbers. You can't talk about their personality, you can't talk about them having a mind capable of you know, making decisions, solving problems. You absolutely can't talk about them having emotions like happiness, sadness, fear, despair. Those are all unique to humans. That's how they thought. But I'd had this wonderful teacher when I was a child, my dog. You can't have a dog, a cat, a rat, a bird, or I don't care what. and not know we're not the only sentient, sapient beings on the planet. And because the chimps are biologically so like us, like we share 98.7% of their composition of DNA, and because their behavior is so like ours, kissing, embracing, holding hands, patting one another, males competing for dominance, standing upright, swaggering, shaking a fist, lips punched in a furious scowl. Remind you of some male politicians, right? Mm-hmm. And the long childhood, the observational learning, as well as experience, of course. So gradually, science had to change its attitude. And once chimps had opened the door, okay, we're not the only sentient, sapient beings, that opened the door to all the others.
But I was kind of curious as to whether you think that greater empathy for animals, for example, or plants, is sort of like an overlooked, if not conservation.
Yes, I think it's important. I just have empathy for trees. I love trees. And I feel really sad when forests are cut down, especially the old growth forests. But empathy for animals, that was another thing I was told when I went to Cambridge. You cannot be a scientist if you have empathy for your animals, because you cannot be objective. And that's not true. It's absolutely not true. You can be completely objective and still have empathy. Don't you agree?
Oh yeah, I agree.
But I think people don't really understand how much we depend on the natural world for food, for air, for water, all the rest of it. But what we depend on is a healthy ecosystem, that complex mix of plants and animals, everyone with a role to play. And I see that as like a tapestry. And so each species is like a thread in this tapestry, and they're all interdependent. So as you pull out a thread, as a species disappears, and then you pull out another thread, and you pull out, in the end, the tapestry hangs in tatters, and the ecosystem collapses. And that's what's happening, and that's what we depend on, healthy ecosystems.
On that front, do you kind of have do you have a guiding principle that you've kind of carried through your life and work?
Respect.
Like respect for other species, respect for other people?
Respect for people and other animals and the environment.
Yeah, I like that a lot.
Respect's very important.
I like that a lot too, because that's exactly my guiding principle, so appreciate that.
But Rhett, I've come to think of humanity as at the mouth of a very long, very dark tunnel, and right at the end is a little star shining, and that's hope. But it's no good sitting wondering, when's that star coming? No, you've got to, I don't know quite what the biblical expression, gird your loins, is, but I love it. You've got to gird your loins, roll up your sleeves, and crawl under, climb over, work around all the obstacles that lie between us and the star. There's climate change, loss of biodiversity, poverty, because people in poverty destroy the environment to survive, killing of the soil, industrial agriculture, fossil fuel burning, go on and on and on and on. Good news, there's people working on every single one of the problems. But as you say, the sad thing is they're so often working in silos, and I think one could suggest many examples, but the one that's so simple, a group of people are really excited because they've shut down a coal mine. All those CO2 emissions won't be going into the environment. But they haven't thought about the people who lose their jobs, who fall into poverty, may destroy the environment to survive. But there are groups of people teaching alternative ways of making a living when an industry closes down. So if your coal mining group had reached out to them, then it would be win-win-win situation.
Yeah, we definitely need more of that. So I guess my last question would be, you're such a wonderful storyteller. Is there a story that you haven't told very often or haven't told in a while that you would want to tell?
Oh, golly, what story? Well, there's a story I love about Roots and Shoots. And it was the first group in the Democratic Republic of Congo, DRC, where JGI has an office in the eastern part, Goma, which is where all the minerals are. So there's always conflict, you know, different militia come in. And so this little group of young people, they were sort of 10 to 12. And for their first project, they'd seen a hill, and they were told that hill used to be sacred and covered in trees. And now most of the trees have gone. So they want to put the trees back. So their mentor, Dario, realized that, well, it's much bigger than the children think, but he didn't want to damp their enthusiasm. So he got a forester friend to donate some little saplings. Then he had to go to the resident militia, and he asked the head guy, you know, was this okay? And he said, well, it's stupid, but I suppose there's no harm in it, but you'll have to take soldiers with you. So you imagine these 15 little children clutching their saplings, and I suppose something to dig with. And it's a long journey, much longer than they thought, and it's hot. When they get there, the ground is hard. And with them, 4 big Congolese soldiers with AK-47s over their shoulders. And so after about 10, 15 minutes, the youngest is a little girl, she's about 9. She starts to cry. And a little while after that, one of the soldiers leans his gun against a tree and goes to help her. And within the next 15 minutes, all the soldiers have left their guns and they're helping the children plant trees. And to me, this is so symbolic of what we're trying to do. Because, you know, we can't solve all the environmental problems while people are fighting each other. I think the main thing is for everybody to understand that every day we live, we make an impact, and to choose wisely the impact we make.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with you.
Yeah.
Well, thank you again for visiting and speaking with me, and happy birthday.
And huge congratulations on where you brought Mongabay, because honestly, I always turn to it.
Oh, thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, it's been wonderful to have your support over the years, and yeah, I mean, it's just been amazing to see how it's grown.
Well, Mongabay is truly an amazing organization, and everybody should turn to it when they want to know the truth.
Well, thank you again. I always love to see you, and
Thank you, Rhett.
excited to see you again a few more times this year.